Welcome to this quality content. Welcome one and all to Object Podcast, a game dev podcast featuring members of the game maker community. My name is Lazy Eye, joined by my co-hosts Maceda and Seabass, and I'm very excited to welcome our guest today, FriendlyCosmonaut. You know her from her fast-growing YouTube channel with game maker tutorials, as well as for her game she's working on with Scary Moonchild, currently titled Project Magenta. Cosmo, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
Hey, welcome. All right. Maceda, do you want to kick us off today?
Yeah, sure. Cosmo, we hear a lot about Project Magenta. It's taking a very interesting look at mental health.
Yeah, that's right.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
So, my sister and I, that's Scary Moonchild, so we started working or thinking about this like a couple of years ago, and we wanted to make a game that was more about story and mental health, just because a lot of the friends we have and a lot of the people we interact with and a lot of the people even online as I started to get into game dev, they struggle with a lot of mental health issues. I think in our community it's like a very common thing. There's a lot that we want to say about it and to try and make a game that could reach out to people and step them through a more positive experience and maybe provide some insight and give them techniques to address their mental health issues through a lot of kind of allegory and metaphor, because it follows this character Sprite through kind of like an identity mental health crisis, and they lose all of the color in their lives, which is kind of something like a mental health breakdown.
Right.
And the game follows them trying to get that back. So yeah, that's kind of what the game is about.
So you're looking to sort of guide people through this experience, whether they've experienced it or not. So if they're going through this now, help relate to them and show them they're not alone on this, and this is one way to cope with it.
Yeah, exactly.
But also to people that are outside of that to say this is a real thing and this is what it's like.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny to mention that because I used to do acting before I did game dev, and my director said something to me that was like my favorite quote, and I think it pertains to all art, which is that art should disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. And I think it's really interesting looking over your project, because I think it does that in a really great way, because for people who have not experienced some of the topics that are being discussed in this game, it's very informative. It can provide a tangible way to experience it. And on the flip side, people that have gone through it can relate to it in a more personal manner and find better coping mechanisms within it. Mm-hmm. What are some of the ideas that you feel it's important to talk about and explore in this project?
Yeah, there's quite a few things. So one of them is just some of the coping strategies that you can use when you have something like anxiety or depression, just what you can do about it, or even just how to recognize that kind of behavior. Because I think one thing that we kind of are frustrated with, because my sister is actually studying psychology, a lot of the time in the public, it's seen as you have it or you don't.
Right.
Whereas obviously it's like a spectrum, and everyone can have bad days. If you find yourself slipping into a mental health problem and you don't recognize the signs, then it's only going to get worse. But if you can identify some behavior that is disordered or unhealthy, then it's going to be a way for you to try and address those early and be a happier person. Right. Yeah, so we want to include a lot of examples of very common behavior that it's often glorified, even in game dev. Stuff like working by yourself on a game completely and shutting yourself off from the world, and working really hard and not going outside and all that stuff. Some people are kind of glorifying that behavior, whereas I think it's definitely contributing to a lot of the anxiety and depression in our community. So we want to point some of that stuff out.
Yeah, it's usually a sign of pretty serious social anxiety or isolation-like behavior. It's usually not a good sign. It means you're in a pretty bad place.
Right, exactly.
But we're like, no, that means he's working hard. No, it doesn't. Maybe, but probably not.
Yeah, exactly.
It's something that I've observed in any asset of art that I've found myself exploring in the different industries, because I still live on campus and all my friends are fine arts majors, and no matter where they're studying or where they're involved, where their passions lies, it feels like that beyond extraordinary work ethic they feel is required of themselves is really common among all those places. I mean, I know that trying to work as a game dev full time, I am 100% guilty of what you're talking about. And I'm so conscious of it and trying to make like baby steps every day to make it better. But the fact is that I'm in front of my computer working for not a good balanced amount of hours.
I watched something recently. They talked about this. Everyone has to work all the time. Relaxing's for the weak. What they pointed down to is just that the society as a whole right now is like hyper competitive, and that really does fall under game dev too, because there's 10,000 other people in your state alone that are like trying to do the exact same thing, right? Well, what's going to make you come out on top? Immediate jump to is, I'll work more.
I've seen that in startup culture as well. It's exactly the same. It's people take pride in staying at the office and sleeping on the couch, arriving at 8, going home at ridiculous times. I've been there myself, and it's no fun. And actually, if you find a better balance, it's not necessarily a big impact on productivity.
You get more out of it when you're in a healthier headspace, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. Also, people who do work like that, I think a lot of the solo devs, there have been some articles floating around. You hear that they've been working on their game really hard for like 5 years or something, and then they finish and they completely crash. They've completely burned out and they're miserable, and maybe they've cut themselves off from their families. Obviously, this doesn't go for everyone, but there are cases of this. And I just don't think it's sustainable, and the people who can make it work are the very lucky few.
Yeah.
For most people, if you're a healthy, happy person, you're going to be more productive, and the work that you put out is going to be more meaningful. Just everyone is going to be better off if you're a happy and healthy person.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. What was your first entrance point into this being a career for you? I mean, like, was it YouTube? Was it jam games? What was the first thing that made you go, all right, I think I'm ready to like really pursue this now?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to pinpoint, but weirdly, when I was very young, I actually, I did have a little spin at using Game Maker, like in primary school or something, and then I completely forgot about it, and I kind of wanted to do writing or something. During my last summer of school, I started playing a lot of games with my brother, and he started telling me that there are game development engines out now that you can learn that are free, like Unity and stuff. Honestly, I just never heard of that before. As soon as I did, I kind of researched it and threw myself into it. So
how long ago was this?
I think it's been a couple years now.
Okay. But you don't remember specifically like when you started doing YouTube or any of that?
So after kind of fooling around in a bunch of different engines that didn't really take, so like I tried out Unity and Unreal and stuff. I went back to Game Maker and I kind of remembered the interface a little bit. Just everything kind of clicked when I started programming. I think one of the first things I did was I actually watched Heartbeast's RPG tutorial, and I kind of just devoured all of the episodes really quickly, and I was not enjoying my uni as much at the time, and so it was a really nice outlet.
Right.
And I kind of just threw myself into it, and then I started not being able to find tutorials for the stuff that I wanted to do, like some of the dialogue stuff. Once I'd figured it out, I just kind of thought that maybe other people would be having the same problems as me, and maybe I could make tutorials for them.
Right.
At what point did you start to transition from being a new developer that's learning how to use things and starting to decide that it might be something that you want to do as a career? Did it kind of click immediately? You were like, oh, this is what I need to do. This is meant for me for all of these reasons.
I am very slow to decide things, and honestly, I can't even say that now I'm 100% have my feet in the door. But as soon as I kind of did the research and saw games that I might like to make, I think stuff like Undertale and some of the more story-based games even, that was when I kind of thought, oh, I could do that, I'm sure. Like if I work hard enough and I learn the code, and then as I did get into coding and I found that I was learning relatively quickly, yeah, I just thought it is something that I could do, and really something that anyone could do.
Right. It's interesting that you bring up Undertale, because first of all, I've played very little of Undertale, so anything I say should be taken with a grain of salt. But when I was looking at Project Magenta a little bit, my first thought was due to, I want to say, the ambiguity of it, like how little the players immediately thrown, like, this is a video game, here's how you play, here's everything that's going on, here's the lore, here's the, just the kind of mystery and the presentation. The presentation, just kind of a different nature of it. I didn't want to say it because I feel like every game is compared to big established games like Undertale now, but I did see some of the connections, so I'm curious if that was a inspiration for you, or if there's other games that were a direct influence to the construction of this project.
Oh yeah, definitely. So Undertale, I think some of the aspects that I enjoy in games aren't easy to articulate because it's kind of the feel of the game, and I think actually that's why people love Undertale so much. It has this sort of, it's kind of off-putting, but at the same time it's very comforting, and there is a lot of mystery in the game, and it's just very subtle, and the writing is really witty and everything, and it just contributes to this really like kind of subtle, and I don't even know how to articulate it, but that's something that I really loved about it. And I'm not sure about other games, but there are kind of other influences for us. I think Coraline, have you guys seen that?
Oh, is that the like kind of horror looking game?
Oh, actually I don't know if it's a game, but it was a movie.
Oh, I thought you were talking about there's a game called Caroline.
I feel like I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so that, and it's kind of like they have buttons sewed into their eyes, and it's kind of for kids, but it's very creepy. But
oh, I know. Okay.
Yeah.
That is very creepy. I've seen it.
Yeah. Obviously, those are kind of creepy things, but I don't want our game to be off-putting or triggering for anyone. Like, that's the last thing we want to do. But there's this kind of disarming nature about it, and it's this kind of otherworldly feeling that you get when you play the game. And my sister has been redoing the art assets like 1,000 times to try and create a feeling like that. I think like what you said before about games being kind of like the ultimate art form, I completely agree. And we both feel like to create an experience and take someone through the experience, and to have music and dialogue and gameplay and all of those little subtle elements in a game, it's just the best way to try and communicate and, touch someone's heart, I think.
Right.
I could be wrong, but I believe that ambiguous thing we're discussing, I think what you're going for is like how kids can relate more to animals because it's not something they have in their real life, and so you kind of let your expectations down. And that's, I think, what you're referring to that Undertale does.
I think a lot of games nowadays, and kind of for a while, just are very happy to give the player a lot of information right away, which is personally not something I enjoy in games because I like making my own stories in the games. Like, I treat video games now the same way I treated Legos when I was little. They're a big sandbox for me to play in, and I think games that don't provide a ton of information, a ton of established rules at the beginning, but instead just throw you into a world, leave it open to a lot more for your audience to... Right, it's like the audience can interpret what they want to out of the game, and they can also relate to the character more. Because you mentioned your main character, Sprite, whose name I believe does come from as a reference to sprites in Game Maker, which are kind of just this open blank canvas. The idea is that anyone can put themselves into this no rules, no gender established, no nothing character, right? So you can feel like you're more of a part of the story.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Good game design 101. Mark that one.
Yeah, well, I think it's something that I want to see. I want to see more of it. I've ranted about this before, is that I really struggle with games where it's like, this is who you have to be, regardless if you see anything about yourself in this character. Because, I mean, that goes to, writing and screenplay writing and any kind of writing when you want the reader to be able to tap into the characters you're writing about a little bit. Yeah. And the more rules you establish and the more you lock a character away, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but that specific quality can become more difficult.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a difficult balance to strike because some of that I think is about being more inclusive and allowing someone to tell their own story or have their own experience through games. And I think that's why games are so magical, is unlike other media, they have the element of agency. And if the person doesn't feel like they can actually make decisions and have control over the player, then what's the point? They're just kind of reading a story. It can be hard also, though, to strike a balance between not, especially for inexperienced players, so people who haven't been playing games all of their lives, they might not recognize the tropes and instructions and they might just think you've given them nothing to go off. So you do kind of have to give some kind of tutorial aspect or a little bit of information about the game, something for them to latch onto. So it's actually really hard to establish that balance.
Right. So right now you're doing YouTube and Patreon. Those are your primary, let's say, game dev incomes. Are you trying to lean towards it, like more the actual like production side now with this current game? Or are you kind of like, I'll just do all three and just let things happen? I know you say you're slow with decisions, so I don't feel like I'm not trying to corner you into making a decision right now.
You don't have to decide, yeah.
I think I would like to make a game, but the thing that drew me to teaching and YouTube and everything was just because I like to teach, so that I think I would still want to put out videos occasionally, although honestly, as time has gone on, like I absolutely hate editing, and it's always been the thing that I don't want to do, so it's kind of been a relief not to make videos for a while. But maybe I can do some more written stuff or make systems. I'm still interested in doing that, even if I'm switching to making more games and stuff.
But your Patreon backers, they stand behind you on your game development too, correct?
Actually, at the moment, I've paused that just because I thought it would be unfair to expect that. I don't really know. It's always been linked to my videos, so it is on pause at the moment.
Okay. I mean, I think that's really respectable, because you're showing them that you genuinely care. Like, if you're supporting me for content on this particular front, then, I won't take your money then. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that's why they came here originally, so it would be too awkward for me to switch gears. Although a lot of them have said that they would support me regardless, but I don't want to take advantage of anyone or anything. It's a bit, it would be a bit uncomfortable to do that.
Sean mentioned this as well, because he also is in a position where he's making YouTube tutorials and he has a Patreon for it, and he also has a game on the side. And when we were talking to him, he stated that he does want to be able to work on his game more. But it's interesting because he was very appreciative of how supportive his Patreon community has been, and it seems like that is a common thread for people, where the people supporting a creator on Patreon, it's not that they don't care what the creator is making, but they seem much more open to change and new ideas and the personal needs of the creator, as opposed to what I've seen on YouTube. YouTube seems slightly more cutthroat, and I don't know if I'm not speaking to the game maker community, I'm just saying in general. YouTube has been rather unforgiving to creators in the past who have wanted to do other things, or wanted to move on, or wanted to take a break.
Or just change the format slightly.
Right, yeah, just little things, because the creators are people too that want to grow and evolve. They don't want to do the same thing. They want to keep making stuff. Have you observed that Patreon has been that kind of a supportive audience?
Yeah, definitely. Just I think the kind of people who are on Patreon are very invested in what I'm doing, and also just they've been with me for a while, and they're also growing alongside me, so they're interested in where I'm going, and I'm interested in where they're going as well, so it's a lot more intimate. Whereas with YouTube, there's different people watching each video, people stop watching halfway through, and it's like a lot more dispassionate. But I think this way people feel like they have a stake in my future, and honestly they do, because I feel like a lot has changed since I've done this, and it is because of those people who have supported me and given me an opportunity really to grow, because I didn't think that this would be something that was possible until I tried this. And yeah.
Can I ask, is that your sister listening right now?
Oh no. Actually, it probably is.
I saw someone with a yellow icon with the name Scary, and I thought the same thing. She's typing.
If
it might be. She says hi.
Like, that's not what we agreed on for the game.
Actually, I did want to ask. It's not the most common for people to already have this close of a relationship as siblings, and I'm really interested to hear what working with your sister is like, because I have a brother, and if I try to imagine the two of us making a video game together, I would run into my closet and cry. That would be the most it would not go well
agree.
At all, because in my professional experience of working with other people, it can be really difficult But the fact that you're not super familiar promotes a certain sense of professionalism. So I'm curious as to what having a sibling dynamic tied in with a professional working relationship, how that can work and how that's different.
So the two of us are twins, so we have been extremely close for our entire lives, and honestly, when we work together, we've done it for our whole lives. It isn't anything new. We fight. We do, and I think, are a lot less patient with each other than someone would be in a more professional environment, but we're also completely free. We feel free to work together and share ideas, right. And it flows a lot more quickly, I think, and we feel a lot more open to discuss everything and to make little changes and be kind of nitpicky because we're both on the same page. Anything we say isn't going to be taken with that much offense. So honestly, it's been really good. I can't imagine being as open with other people as I am with her.
Do you two have a standard love-hate sibling relationship where it's like the reason you're so short with each other is because you expect so much because you know exactly how the other half thinks, right? You're like, no, just do it like this. I know you're going to say no, let's just do this. Hush. Like, are you guys, is it like that between the two of you, or is it much less hostile?
Oh, yeah. Like, it's not really hostile at all. Like, we barely ever fight, really. It's only just an annoyed kind of word, really. It doesn't...
But you guys get over it in just a second or two, then?
That's basically right, yeah.
Oh, all right.
I have a similar discussion with my wife about whether we would ever run a company together. And it's a similar thing where I'm like, I work all day and then I come back and have and be with my wife, but then I would be working with my wife all day and then coming back and being with my wife. And I think the conclusion we reached was, yes, there might be an issue of it's too much, but also my wife and I have a good 10 years of knowing how to cope with each other. So it could well be that having this previous relationship is beneficial because you know how each other works and you know how to stay out of each other's way when things aren't great.
Yeah.
Especially for a game that's talking about the topics that this one is, it must be crucial to be able to have the trust to express yourself that way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In my own experience, I'm only very emotionally vulnerable with my actually one particular sibling. And is that the case for you? Do you feel that you're more vulnerable with her over other people?
Yeah. Like my whole family's pretty close, but I don't think I would be anywhere near as comfortable expressing myself to other people, because when we talk to each other, it's honestly kind of like what you would expect from twins. We barely ever have to communicate a thought because we kind of both already agree and have shared the kind of experience. So if something feels off about the game or we want to change something, we both already have kind of felt that, so it's easy to say why and then try and do something that approaches what we both want because we both already agree, so it's really easy.
That's really cool, actually. I'm interested in how the game turns out because I don't know any other GM devs that are in a similar position, or really any devs that have released anything that I know about where it's from twins or a brother and a sister.
And while you two do have all those similarities, I'm sure I had two of my closest friends growing up were twins and they were polar opposites. Do you think that you two think very similarly, or do you, because of your different backgrounds and what you work in, do you approach problems and view them in different ways and it contributes to the construction of the game?
So we have actually had a very similar upbringing, and although I am programming now, she has actually done a whole heap of maths that I haven't done, and she's very... She thinks in a very similar way than I do. And honestly, if she wanted to pick up programming, because sometimes I just tell her about the code and she helps me work through it, so stuff like that. Although I think some things that we do differ on is the more aesthetic stuff, and she can speak about things in a way that I find a bit more difficult to articulate, and I can't draw at all, and she's much better at drawing and understanding why. So what I was saying before about like Coraline and stuff, and I can't even tell you why exactly I like it, but she probably could tell you exactly what aspect of it makes it creepy and stuff like that. So we do have kind of slight differences, but we're always kind of on the same kind of page.
She has more aesthetic understanding.
Yeah.
Right. So, Cosmo actually has something to announce, which is really exciting that she is going to announce on the podcast for everyone. So, Cosmo, would you like to tell everyone this secret project that you have been working on?
Sure. Okay. So I obviously have not been making tutorials for a while, and I've been working on this game with Scary Moonchild, but a little while ago I was approached by YoYoGames to make a little tutorial series. So I have been working on that for the past month or so, and it is kind of beginner tutorial series on making a game called Space Rocks, which is kind of like an Asteroids clone. So that should be out very soon.
Awesome.
Nice.
That's really exciting.
Will this be delivered through the GMS2 interface?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Sorry, it's for
Nice.
Game Maker 2.
Awesome. Cool. You said this is a beginner tutorial, so this is oriented specifically to brand new developers to step into the engine for the first time?
Yeah, so it is for beginners, so it's not assuming any knowledge, and it's going to have 2 streams, so we're going to have a GML stream and a drag and drop stream, just as a way of making it more accessible. This is a game that you should just be able to jump into without any prior experience.
That's awesome.
What was the process like? Not the YoYoGames side, but what was the creation process like for this in comparison to the tutorials you've done before? Was there more of a sense of urgency for professionalism? What was something you had to like go through the whole time and do completely different?
Yeah, so for some of my videos that are going to have a lot of kind of explaining, I do scripting, and most of the time I don't really like to do that. But for these, I basically wrote a script for every single episode, and there's a lot of graphics and pictures to explain everything. And I was really careful in my recording. I had to re-record a few times, and there was a lot of back and forth with Yo-Yo just to get it 100% right. Because, yeah, I do want this to be a good introduction for people. Like, it's very important that your first interaction with the program is going to be a positive one, and that you feel like you're able to make a satisfying game relatively quickly, or, you might fall out of love with it, which is not what I want.
I've seen that with the current, if I remember right, there's like a floating disc that shoots, I think is the current intro tutorial they have.
Yeah.
And everyone I've introduced to Game Maker that's opened that tutorial has quit within about 20 to 30 minutes.
I did take that tutorial.
And that's not to say that's not a well-educated, good tutorial. It's more so that what you present with is like, oh, I can make something that no one wants in 4 hours.
Yeah.
And I think what you're doing completely bypasses that. So you go, oh, this is familiar. I've seen a game like this. This is cool. Plus, it's presented by someone with words.
It's really exciting. As someone that lurks in this Game Maker Discord all the time, it's a very, very common question of people saying, hey, I just got a Game Maker. Where do I start? So much so that we have pins of lists of channels to go view and tutorials, but it would be really cool, I think, for people to be able to right away say, like, okay, here's where I can start. Because starting is, for a lot of people, the hardest part. Once you have a little bit of foundational knowledge, then it's a lot easier to build off of that. But a lot of people feel totally lost when starting out, so I'm very excited to see this series for people to be able to use.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Lazy, I'm not sure you're allowed to say that you lurk in this community. I think you do a bit more than that.
I live in this community. My soul is tied to it, and I can't escape. Please help me. Is that better?
He's like the landlord.
I'm the mayor. All right. So I'm actually going to bring us into a few questions that we've gotten over Twitter and through the chat right now. The first question comes from another Twitter handle that I'm never going to be able to pronounce. At rcelicio says, what is your all-time favorite game?
Yeah, okay.
It's not, I would hate this question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I could never answer it.
Obviously, I think with most people, it's going to be like a 50-way tie, but I'll just say one that I find quite formative and interesting, which is probably Dragon Age Origins, which is something that I played, I think, towards the end of high school. And it was my first introduction to a game that was more about story, and it was not like, the Mario kind of things that I've been playing before. It was subversive, and it had interesting characters, and it had this commentary on social issues and stuff through the lens of some metaphors, like the mages as being kind of an oppressed group. So it was probably one of the first games that I really fell in love with, and it introduced me to the fact that games could be different than just an arcade games. They could be used to give someone an experience, and like a story, like movies, with like really good writing and high production value and everything, as something that I might want to do one day. So I think it was probably a really important game for me that had a big impact.
Awesome. Okay. So we have another question here that comes from on Twitter at Stefan von Randa, who asks, I'd love to know what you think we as a community could do to make the game dev scene more inclusive and a welcoming place, which is interesting because it was a conversation that we touched on with Sean as well, which eventually actually led to him saying, I'm not really qualified to answer this question, but you know who you should ask and have on the podcast, FriendlyCosmonaut. So it's awesome that we have you here now and that we've gotten this question from someone. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject.
Yeah.
Feel free to pass the torch to the next person to ask.
Yeah. Every guest can choose our next guest on the podcast.
Yeah, so this is such a massive topic, and I have a lot to say about it. So I kind of just want to preface it with, like, I feel a bit conflicted about talking about stuff like this, and even the fact that you're asking me as opposed to Sean, because I know that I am in a minority, and although I still want to be treated like anyone else. That's kind of what my feelings have always been. But I recognize, and I think other people recognize, that is an ideal. That's if the world was a utopia, but it's not. Nothing exists in a vacuum. We have context and culture that we have to take into account, and the current state of things is a huge disparity between genders and between people of color and with sexuality and everything, and that's how it's been in our game dev industry for decades. It's starting to change now, but that's kind of what we have to deal with at this point. And I can kind of attest to that. Although I don't work in the industry, my YouTube stats tell me that my viewers are 95% male, which is pretty overwhelming. But all that said, so my answer to that question is just, it's going to depend on where you work, because honestly, our game maker community, I feel like it's very progressive and very welcoming, and I haven't really faced any kind of discrimination. I've only had support. But elsewhere in the industry, we hear every other week about some kind of controversy or harassment or something. And that's even just in the Western world, but obviously it's going to be different all over the world. So I think the door to game dev has been closed for so long for people like me. It's, it was bolted shut, and there were lasers attached to the door ready to shoot everyone that would approach that's different. And now those locks have been kind of taken off and the laser has been dismantled, but it's still hostile, and the door is open a crack, and we're waiting on the other side with open arms, ready to welcome people in, but they have to get to the door first.
Right. I, from my third-party perspective, have kind of observed that I feel like there is a stark difference between the old generation of video game developers and the new rising indie scene, which seems to be polar opposite in being a very welcoming, friendly community. But your point about, now it's time for us to show people that they're welcome and come in, that's really interesting, because I'm not expecting you to have the answer, but it's a really interesting conversation that's important to all of us. Is, we know we are an accepting, loving community. We're always trying to become better and improve how we can. But I think a huge part of it simply is letting these people know, like, you are welcome here. Please come here. We had a conversation in the server a few days ago where another developer said, yeah, I wouldn't have come to this server if one of the admins hadn't specifically reached out to me and said, hey, we want you here. You're welcome here. Please join us. And that, kind of made a light go off in my head. It's like, oh, okay, it's the issue is not just making the community more welcoming and more accepting and loving, but it's also about somehow communicating to all these other people that they should come here and we want them here. And it's not because that they are a certain demographic. It's just that we want to be able to have anyone have the experiences that we have had and have every equal opportunity. So
yeah,
my question, which I'm not expecting you to be able to answer, is do you have any ideas of how we or people in general can help that more? And I know you said that you haven't faced a large amount of discrimination, which is fantastic, but was there anything for you when starting out, any doubts that you had, and then something that dissuaded that you think would help more people?
Right, so I think my experience, just to answer the second part of that, has been a little bit atypical of what other people might have, because for my entire life, my family and my kind of upbringing has been kind of unconventional and just completely supportive of anything that I wanted to do. Honestly, if anyone ever presented me with any kind of discrimination or talked down to me or anything, I have never really stood for it and just done whatever I want anyway. But
right.
I think I recognize that I'm from Australia, I'm from a middle-class family, I'm white. I haven't faced as many hurdles as other people trying to get to this point, because like you said, the state of game development is, if you ask anyone in the public, so someone outside of this world, so like I was kind of saying how I didn't even know game dev was really a thing until a few years ago, most people think games, the world of games, is about Fortnite and Call of Duty, and we all make stuff about guns, and it's all violent, and it's all marketed for children, for young boys, and that's kind of the public opinion. We know that's not the case, but other people don't, and I think communicating that to people, to young women, to young people of color, to minority groups who have grown up not necessarily in the gaming community, who don't have that kind of knowledge, maybe that they're interested in related fields, maybe they're doing animation or writing, that over here is game dev, and telling them games are amazing, it's more welcoming now, there are tools that are freely available that you can use to make a game, to tell them that they're welcome and that games aren't what they think they are. They're not just all shooters, you know, you can be, like I said, subversive and make commentary and make games about stories and their own personal experiences. And I just think that most people, unlike me, who haven't grown up playing games, because it's kind of hard, they've grown up doing other things, but if we tell them more, if we have spokespeople going to universities and talking to young people, and even in your friend groups, just telling them about games, that's a way to get them to the door, because they have to get there first. A lot of the advice that people give is about kind of not being a cruel person once they are inside the door, to be kind to people within the industry, but we forget that we need to get people to even know about the world of game dev. So I think looking outside the box and starting young also, so with like your own children and your own nieces and nephews and everything, and encouraging them to play games, to look outside your immediate community and to welcome more people in.
A lot of people, and I think this is more in the game dev community, a lot of people think that it's more because there's no women in the industry that like act as role models, whereas for guys, you know, like Stardew Valley, you're like, oh, a guy made that. Undertale, a guy made that. You know, I think you're a great example of someone that would inspire and drive more people to actually look into the industry that otherwise wouldn't feel invited. Do you think over time just having more women in the industry as role models will change that?
Yeah, definitely. So this is also just a topic that I see fall like arguments over this topic about why representation is important.
Right.
So our Discord group or our Game Maker community, even if you're not intending to be hostile or to be unwelcoming, if you walk into a group and no one is like you and they already, they're established and they're welcome and they know things that you don't, there's this kind of culture that they've been in for all of their lives that you haven't been, you feel like an outsider and you don't feel welcome.
Yeah, like entering like a foreign like friend circle. You're like, oh, all these inside jokes I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like a bunch of friendly people, but you're not familiar with what they're familiar with. You don't know them. You're the new person, and you're different.
Exactly.
Yeah. Part of your answer is the misconceptions of what video games are in the industry right now, which is like Fortnite, Call of Duty, all those things, and that there needs to be more widespread knowledge of like, hey, there are other games out there, which is interesting because it ties into the very first things that we were talking about. Video games are this art form. Like, there's no denying they are an art form that can be used in a completely huge mirage of ways like any other art form. People may think that games are for this one specific topic that might be more geared towards young boys, but there's also so many other games that can do so many more cool things that I think the indie scene has been pushing forward more. And I think there isn't a clear answer, like a clear thing that we can all do right after this podcast. Part of what we can do is just create content that is in itself welcoming and appeals to different things than what people might already know. Maybe just having all those examples out there for people to look at, and in tangent to what Sebastian said, having role models and more will just continue to make it a domino effect and hopefully promote more change.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a change. I got into game dev a couple of years ago after playing To the Moon, which...
Oh, RPG Maker, right?
Yeah, RPG Maker.
Game did really well.
But it was based on the story. I was like, this is a game that, frankly, doesn't have that great of gameplay, but sound is amazing, and it's telling this really powerful story. And that's something I want to do. And I feel like that's not something that we didn't have such games even a few years ago.
No.
So definitely some changes there.
Even the point-and-click adventures back then were very extremely male-oriented and weren't really like about anything emotional. It was always saving like the damsel or the standard like the archetype knight story. But yeah, it's definitely not the case anymore.
Right. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it seems like progress is being made. Ben Star says in the chat, the good thing, though, is that we are surely making progress on that side. Video games become more and more diverse in its consumer base, which will lead to more potential diverse game devs. We just need to keep pushing, promoting diversity, love, and openness in the community and field of work. And I agree. And I think you mentioned that you did as well, Cosmo, is that, it's not something that can be solved overnight, but I think there has been good progress being made. I think the general attitude, even if you boil it down to just what's considered acceptable, even if there are people that still hold quote-unquote old views, even they know that it's not acceptable and that they shouldn't say it because the tides are slowly turning. There's so much more work to be done, but I like to think that things are at least getting better slowly. Progress has been pointing forward.
Yeah, I share their frustration because when you ask this question, you're hoping for a tangible answer, but honestly, it's just, like I was kind of saying before, there are different cultures within the gaming community, and some of them are more progressive than others, but honestly, your reach is quite small, and there might not be much that you can do. You can try and make long-term change by encouraging different culture and encouraging more people to come up and everything, but it's going to take time, and the best you can kind of do as one person is just be mindful of everyone around you, be mindful that they have had a different experience, that they have faced different hurdles than you have to get to this point. Be supportive of everyone who's coming through. I think that's all you can really do.
One of the things we considered, we knew immediately after, the last episode that we wanted to invite you onto this episode, and I've had a lot of people reach out to me hoping that we'd ask questions around this topic because the conversation we had in the last episode was really great and people wanted to continue that and get your input. But like my biggest worry was, yes, you of course have an incredible perspective that you might want to share, and I'm sure it's an important subject to you. I can't help but feel that maybe one wouldn't want to be a warrior on the subject, like it doesn't mean it's not important, but one of my worries is like I don't want to make it feel like a burden, like they have to discuss this because
have to have an opinion and a statement.
Right, like if the goal is equality, then I want to just interview them as a normal person for who they are. I almost don't even want to mention it, but we did because, everyone's so interested in it for the right reasons. And we talked to you before it, and, but I'm curious, just, it's not even a question. I'm curious if you have thoughts on that matter specifically, and if it is something that is brought up regularly to you and that you feel like you're in a weird position to talk about.
Yeah, I do have kind of complicated feelings about this. I think everyone kind of does, but like I was saying before, I think I recognize that although I do just want to be included and treated like everyone else in the community, there's also just the fact that, like, you can't. That would be ignoring the context of the world that we live in. People like me, they are going to be treated differently, even if it's just unconsciously. So, although I don't feel like this has been brought up that much with me, but I do feel like, so like I said, my viewers are like 95% male, but I have had a disproportionate amount of women reaching out to me, and I never even really said anything, but they just came to me and said that they're so glad that there is a teacher like me. They asked me questions about my experience. It did make me realize just that it is really important to have representation, just to let people know that it is okay and that they will be welcome. It's important to have these discussions, and I think if we treated people just completely the same, it's just not how the world is. That's being dishonest, I think.
It wouldn't be natural.
Yeah, it is important to discuss, because if you don't, then it will go unnoticed and people will think that it kind of is normal, but it's not. So you do need to point it out. Yeah, I do feel a bit conflicted, but I am really glad that Sean said what he did and that you guys chose to have me on.
Yeah. It's our pleasure, of course.
So in a perfect equal game dev scene, right, where there's boys and girls equally, it's 50-50. Like you said, it's hard to talk to each other like you're exactly the same person.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think it would be like? Do you think it should be 100% like, hey dude? So yeah, how do you feel an equal playing field would be? What it would look like in, let's say, 50 years?
I think, I think I get what you're talking about. So I think what people often say is just equal opportunity. That can kind of be quicker to change than the actual complete culture of discrimination and prejudice and kind of just the last dregs of it coming through. But equal opportunity is more about, equal chances to be hired and stuff like that. So that comes from, like I was saying, getting to the door kind of, and just recognizing, I think right now, that it's harder for some people to even get to the door.
Right.
I kind of just think at the moment just to be mindful of that fact, and if people are coming through and you're not sure how to address them, or you're not sure how to ask them, like, everyone is going to be different. Some people are comfortable with just being treated like anyone else, and some people have gone through a lot and rightfully they want it to kind of be addressed. It is really hard, and I think you just have to be open and communicate and ask people if it's okay.
Right. Be a good person.
So I'll pose a question that's poised towards more of the future. So you have this YYG tutorial that's happening. You have your YouTube channel. You have your Patreon. You have this game. In 5 years' time, I won't ask where you think you see yourself, because that's a lot harder. What would you like your career and workflow to look like in 5 years from now?
So I guess in 5 years' time, I hope that we've finished our game by then. So I hope that I have that under my belt. It would be great, I guess, if I could travel more and, go to London in the US, because apparently that's where all of you guys are. And to meet you guys and maybe work with you, to maybe have, a little workspace or an office or something like that, to still be doing some tutorials and still be making content and still working on games. Just stuff like that.
The game dev
That's
dream.
a game dev dream, yeah.
Right,
I think
exactly.
everyone I've spoken to says it'd be nice to have an office and have a team of people,
Yeah,
all go
people
to the
who respect
office.
my
I'm
job. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's
Right.
a peak of being an indie. Yep.
Yeah, I've only just recently gotten to the point where when people ask, because I live on a college campus where I had friends where I used to go here, and they're asking like, oh, how's school going? I'm like, oh, actually, I work as a game developer. I expected people to think that's a lot cooler than people think.
No, you're
I
a
took the
weirdo to them.
reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think it's such a foreign thing. Video games have been around for a while, but I feel like people are still confused about how to think when I say,
How do you make money sitting in your house all day? What do you mean?
yeah.
I'm going to say I still do. I recruit for our team in an engineering company, not making games, and seeing game dev on a resume, on a CV, usually isn't looked upon that well. My views have changed, obviously, doing game dev now in my spare time, but yeah, it's not something that people respect as much as you'd think.
No, yeah.
I've started changing it too. I'm a programmer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I
People-
say.
Yeah, people seem to like that one a lot more. Like, oh yeah, I write code. Whoa.
The best is if you talk to older generations. All my grandparents have asked, and like, oh, I hear you're making games now. Yep, that's what I do
Oh
for a
my
living.
God.
And they're like, does it pay the bills? I'm like, oh my God. Like they think I'm like a weird
the one-
like under the bridge like hobo.
Troll.
I'm like, no, like I actually feed myself. You know, like it's like any job, just not at a company. They're like, that's good. Well,
Yeah.
good for you. I hope it picks up. I'm like, I didn't say it wasn't doing well.
Yeah.
But I think that's what
a-
most people see it as, is like a weird, like kind of bummy job, when it's totally not. Like you have to be really educated, or at least have tons of experience to do game dev in a professional context.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't know. I think people just don't get it.
There's no public awareness. No one talks about it.
Like we were talking about before, people's conceptions of video games as a whole is not right, and seemingly the perception of people that work in the industry as well is not right. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's because my perspective is warped because I've been doing it for so long and it's always been an interest of mine. But people just like, they don't know how to respond. Like they don't. Topher put it in the chat really well. He said, yeah, I do game dev for a living. Hang in there, buddy. I'm sure you'll get back on track soon. Wait, no.
Yeah, no, that's exactly, yeah.
I think it's
Hopefully.
changing. I think it's changing.
I think it is slowly changing. I don't know. It's just because I'm in my bubble a lot. You know, I'm surrounded by programmers and game devs all the
I
time.
think we need more success stories, because even friends my age that I talk to are like, oh, that's cool. So when are you getting a job? I'm like, oh.
Oh, okay.
We got televised esports now, so it's sort of getting closer to mainstream accepted pastime activity. Right now or a few years ago, gaming is still like sort of nerdy, kind of guilty pleasure kind of thing. People don't tend to say, hey, I spent a whole weekend gaming. That doesn't sound so great.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's changing, definitely.
Scary actually said something really interesting in the chat. She said, people don't see games the way we all do. They have so much potential. We just have to show the world what games can be. When people see that, they will flood in the door.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because that kind of perfectly summarizes every single topic that we talked about today. We talked about how games can be an art form. We talked about how they need to be more inclusive. We talked about the new tutorial series, which is going to bring more people in and show them that they can do it. So
Yeah, presenting it
Yeah,
as like an actual
that's-
valid art piece. It's silly to
Right.
look at a book and go, that's a good story, but this video game that tells that story, garbage. That's a waste of your time.
It's exactly that. I mean, as Cosmo said earlier, it's a story where you have agency. It should be at the same level as a movie, in which you can actually make decisions. When you tell someone, I make movies, that's really cool.
Yeah.
It should be the same as that.
Yeah, we've added
Right.
decision making though. Oh well, that's silly. You're like, wait, you mean being immersed in an experience? That's not okay.
All right, well, that's a very interesting note for us to start to wrap up on. But before we do that, Maseta, I believe, has a very critical, very important question that you have to answer no matter what, Cosmo.
Oh,
Maseta,
no.
do you have that question ready?
I'm not sure this is going to come as a surprise anymore, but
I guess after the first episode, I guess it is kind of ruined, but okay.
what's your favorite food?
the worst question.
I don't know if this counts as a food. It's more of a condiment, but probably hummus.
Ooh,
Hummus.
That's a
hummus
great
is
answer.
really good.
Yeah, it is really good.
I was actually at the store recently, and my friend asked, "Do you like hummus?" And I said, "I want to like hummus. I feel like I should like hummus, but I don't like hummus yet."
Okay, so what you should do is make it yourself because it's not the same as store-bought stuff. You have to make it yourself.
Okay. Do you have like a go-to hummus recipe?
Sure. Okay. So basically just grab a food processor and add a couple cans of chickpeas, half a can of the brine that the chickpeas come in, a third cup of oil, about half a lemon, and a generous tablespoon of tahini, and then just one or two cloves of garlic, and just don't overdo it on the garlic, otherwise you'll have this pretty horrid aftertaste. And then as much salt as you can stomach. Personally, I add quite a bit of salt, and that'll make a pretty generously sized tub of hummus. So you could have the recipe, but the food processor might struggle a bit to combine everything. So if that's the case, just add more oil.
That sounds simple enough. I can do that. Okay, perfect. Well, before we wrap up today, Cosmo, is there anything you want to plug or direct people towards if they want to see more of your work?
I guess just probably my Twitter is probably the place that I'm updating the most. So just at FCosmonaut on Twitter.
Okay, awesome. Well, Cosmo, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fantastic episode. We're really glad to have you on.
Thanks, everyone.
And to everyone in the chat right now, thank you so much for joining us. So many people in the chat right now. Oh my goodness. Thank you everyone for joining us on this episode of Object Podcast. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining us. And that's a wrap. All right. Yay. That was really good.
Yay.
I really enjoyed that. Thank you to everyone that joined us live. There are so many people on the channel. I said before we started the podcast in our other channel, before we jumped in, I was like, all right, guys, don't be surprised if like not a lot of people show up. Like this, our first episode was big, but this is more people than we had in the first episode. This is great.
Can I make a request for the next just for everyone listening? I noticed we had instance exists in here, and someone else did like data.win. If we could just get everyone to make their names and make functions, just like in order.
That was already a thing. You missed that. We already had every single person making their name as like a GM pun.
Wait, what was that?
I missed that.
Okay, when I say every person, I'm exaggerating. It was like 10 people in lounge.
I mean every person. Like I want to have the documentation right here on the left hand side.
No. You've created a meme.
And when we unmute you, you have to talk about what you do as a function.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we'll unmute you one by one. You have to read the documentation for your function. This is a terrible idea. No.